This is the industrial side. Most industrial businesses are either won or lost in the day-to-day operations. These are conversations with the operators who run these firms, talking about how they run them, what works, and what doesn't. Stephanie Quay, how you doing today?
I'm great. How are you, Brian?
I'm living the dream as always. I'm happy to chat. You seem to know people who have experienced my pain before, so this might be a therapeutic session for me. I spend a lot of time just talking to operators and kind of industrial manufacturing industries about how their companies work, go to market, ops management, all these kinds of things from the lens of somebody who used to be a searcher, someone trying to find a business to buy, usually outside of the industry they know. So really, I'm just trying to learn from people. And so our last episode was someone who prepares owners to sell their companies. And then this one, while you work on myriad of different things we'll talk about, wants to be focused on preparing a buyer to buy. So that's kind of what we'll hit on.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you, one of the things that I love about the search ecosystem is the willingness for so many people to help, whether that's, former searchers, whether that's individuals that are experts in various phases of the ecosystem. I just love the ability to help others and hope we can share.
Great. So, let's start with you your company's called the Five Experts. Who or what are the Five Experts? Talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's funny. I get a lot of questions like, oh, do you have 5 employees? Is that why you're called Five Experts? And actually, 5 stands for the 5 different phases of an acquisition. So we think about that as phase 1, aspiration and prep, when you're just kind of thinking about search and trying to figure out if it's something that's for you. Phase 2, which is about search and sourcing and trying to find that deal. Phase 3, which is typically when you go into LOI, that deal financing phase. And then the one that I think is most important that you are in, I think, right now, which is phase 4, that ownership and value creation phase. And then, of course, eventually it does at times come full circle. And there's that phase 5, which is exit and succession. So that's what 5 stands for 5 experts. Experts as in we have a network of experts, and we've always thought about being people first in the equation of building out an acquisition operating system. So we have those experts in place. We do also have software and tools to help through those 5 phases. And then finally, we just this week launched our community. So we have that aspect as well, the peer educational aspect of search.
For aspirational phase of this, who does this make sense for?
When I think about who this is for and the searchers that we've had and worked with and where they are, no matter where in the journey they sort of fall, it's really for individuals that want to take something on that is incredibly challenging and put the hard work in to make it successful. A lot of people, I feel like, are in that aspiration phase where they really want to learn about the search ecosystem and really want to learn from it. And that is fantastic. The ones that always move to the next phase are the ones that come incredibly prepared, are ready to put that hard work in, because it's not necessarily the easiest journey to take.
Yeah.
But of course, at the end of the day, it ends up being incredibly rewarding.
Yeah. No, I guess that's a good point there. What is the journey kind of to find a company? In my mind, we think of proprietary in terms of finding some way to find the seller before they're a seller. And then broker, finding somebody who's a seller who's selling and seeing if they could pick you, just like if you were to buy a house or try to auction some nice sneakers or anything on the internet. There's marketplaces all over the place. And so do you all, when you work with people, do you push folks towards one area or the other, on market versus off market?
We don't necessarily push them in one direction or another, but I would say the area that we've seen quite a bit of traction and success is on proprietary
Mhm.
search. There's a little less competition. Of course, it's more challenging and more work to reach out to companies. That is one of the things we do help with, but that's an area where one, there's less competition. Two, you're coming across companies that may or may not have thought about exiting
Mhm.
yet and can pique their interest. And that's just an area where we've seen quite a bit of traction. You get less competition than, say, going in towards a deal that's been brokered.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I did that for 2 years. I think the reason that works is because you're supposed to just do so much research that you find something that nobody would ever think exists, like nursing tools for pig farms, and so like this company manufactures like a specific problem to do that, and so no one's sitting around really at some big private equity desk thinking that's the next big investment. So just by however you find it, finding something unique like that, like it's probably going to be a little bit easier to have a conversation because there's probably not a line of suitors waiting.
Yeah, that's correct. And for sure, that's what we've been seeing. That being said, you have to know, like the preparation part, I feel like, of proprietary search and what you're looking for and really figuring out your buy box and what exactly you want to go after is so incredibly important. So a little bit about what I mean by you always have to be like 10 steps ahead, thinking about what you're targeting. And in so many ways, my background has always been like go to market, more on the
Mhm.
sales side. It,
Mhm.
it is almost like a sales motion that you need to
Mhm.
have when you're searching because you're going out there, you're selling yourself for sure. But you have to know in sales, we say ICP, which is ideal customer profile. So
Mhm.
as a searcher, you need to know who is your ideal customer
Right.
profile. What is that company out there that really is going to be the best match, quote unquote,
And
for you?
yeah, and that's an interesting one because like I think, if you're working with some sort of whether it's established or a startup, the plan probably isn't to change the ICP every 3 weeks. But with search, it kind of is. Like there's a little bit of like I don't know, like breadth over depth that's almost required. Like, how do you coach people through that? Like, or do you disagree?
No, I do agree with that because, like, unlike a company, as you mentioned, where you're
Uh-huh.
going out and like selling a product, now you may sell a product that's location based, but the
Yeah.
interesting about search is it's so often it's tied to a specific location
Right.
of where you're searching. So you almost do. At the end of the day, there's only so many plumbing companies in the San Francisco Bay Area, for instance,
Right.
that you may be going after. So yeah, you do have to tweak your buy box a little bit from time to time. And I think the most important thing that you can do as a searcher during that time is to read signals, read those clues, like
Mhm.
always understand what feedback you're getting from founders and owners, what they're saying to you to maybe see, what, this may be not the right industry or I don't necessarily want to say industry because you can go in home services, right, and look at plumbing and HVAC and a variety of different
Mhm.
subset industries under that. But that being said, I think the best thing that we coach on is read the signals, read the clues out there.
So I guess this would be an interesting point to go into, like what the relationship looks like, I guess, with five experts. Because what I'm imagining is the typical process for like I was a sponsored searcher. There's traditional searchers. It's kind of a combination of owner feedback versus investor feedback. Rarely it's exactly the same thing. And so I'm curious how it works like in your process.
Yeah, and just to make sure I'm understanding the question, are you referring to like the fee structure of five experts and how we
Yeah,
work,
so
or more
yeah, I
about
guess I guess like how do you work with people to look at the feedback in terms of, I guess your folks are if they're looking at proprietary, they're probably having seller calls or they're going to conferences or they're having some sort of conversation with sellers in the industry. And I think we talked about before the call that, you work with a lot of this, maybe like self-funded searchers, so maybe they're not talking to investors that much at the beginning until they're, maybe towards the LOI or later on. And so I'm just curious because a big part of it is one, it needs to fit the actual operator, but then two, it needs to fit investor appetite. So I'm curious, like, how does that investor appetite part come into what you do and how, I guess?
Yeah, that is interesting. And you're right. The majority of the searchers we've been working with are self-funded.
Hmm.
We do manage some of the proprietary search for our searchers.
Hmm.
Now, some of them are doing that on their own. So we have both options. So we do meet with our searchers regularly to understand if they are doing their own proprietary search, what feedback that they are getting. Of course, if we are managing it, we're able to provide the feedback
Right,
directly to the searcher.
right,
So that solves that piece of it. We also do work with independent sponsors as well. And sometimes we do match up independent sponsors with a searcher, and that way they can go in together. I don't want to call it mediation because it's really not. That makes it sound like it's a negative, but we do sit in the middle of investors as well as our searchers from time to time and coordinate the feedback together. And the goal is always, how do we get to the finish line as quickly as possible and really find the right match for everybody involved? And, sometimes it is communicating that, like, what you're looking for needs to be narrowed a bit. Or sometimes the feedback is like, you know what, you're looking for that pig farm. I think you mentioned, was that your
yeah,
some sort of device to help pigs or something?
yeah,
Well, sometimes you need to broaden it a bit.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. It's interesting. It's fun. It's not fun. It's all of those things at the same time. And there's kind of like a dopamine hit of being able to just submit your NDA and getting a sim and having so much information in front of you to be able to, like, instead of the game of having a conversation over 6 to 8 weeks, and maybe you get some more information at the end versus a pre packaged outline. But obviously there's incredibly more competition if you didn't have to do anything besides submit an NDA versus build a real relationship. So it's give and take.
For sure. Although you brought up a good point, like there is that dopamine hit, obviously, when like you get the sim and you sign an LOI. One of the biggest challenges, I think, is not falling in love with the opportunity so much that you're blinded to some of the gaps the company may have. And that's where, like, we have seen instances where some of our recommendations during that LOI process was to actually step back and not pursue the company or change the terms of the deal because there was too much customer concentration, or give feedback that perhaps they may not get an SBA loan. And that's the hardest thing, I think, because you do get that dopamine hit where, like, I found my baby. This is the company that
Right.
I'm going to own, and this is the one I'm going to pursue. But it's through that process that I feel like you need the most expertise guidance, because at the end of the day, so often the searchers we're working with, have a personal guarantee on the line, and that's at risk. And so you don't want to have those like rose colored glasses through that process. You really want to understand, like, is this an opportunity that's going to have value at the end of the day? So that's one area that I think is a big challenge.
Yeah. No, I mean, and I think it's sort of like you could go in one direction or the other. You go in the direction of there's what 100 criteria, like
Yeah.
recession proof, like fragmented market, high margins, growing revenue, no customer concentration, no supply. You could go towards like the company has to have all of that, and then you'll be looking for a job after 2 or 3 years. Or you could go in the other direction and say, well, it's a company. It's in my neighborhood, and like if I fail, I fail. Then you're in bankruptcy court. And so, like, how do you push people towards the middle? Like I think that's almost maybe the most valuable thing, that it's harder to accomplish on your own because, like I said, I mean it's feedback loops. Like the feedback is probably skewing one way or the other based on who you're talking to. The owner is going to be like, oh, you're not going to look at a business at a checklist. I built this for 30 years. And the investors are like, look at the checklist. So how do you push people towards the middle?
It's interesting. Like majority of the things that you just mentioned
Yeah.
and the ones I was mentioning before are fixable. They are fixable. Now it's 100% more challenging if you walk into a business on day one and the owner leaves and all of the customers were sold by them. We see a lot of companies where it's founder dependent sales, and but that being said, that's something that's completely fixable, and it can be fixable even before everybody signs on the dotted line and
Mhm.
the ownership transfers. So to your point, like you can go through a checklist and it's really challenging to find a company that's going to meet all of the criteria. But that being said, if you can on your own have the time to put into working with the owner before it transfers. But that being said, I always see a challenge when you get to that phase that you're in LOI, you don't have time
Sure.
necessarily to meet regularly with the owner to get the transfer of knowledge during that phase because there's quite a bit that needs to go in to, and it's timed, right? You have 60 days, and but that being said, a lot on the checklist are things that can be solved. The hard part is if you wait to solve them until, month two, that ends up being just what I would call is a delay in value creation.
Mhm. That's interesting. I guess like how have you seen that work? Because that's something that I've almost tried to convince owners just on my own. Like these are the problems. Like can we fix them somehow? Like I'll give you a higher multiple. We can fix these. I just can't give you the number you're looking for with these problems existing. Like what kind of solutions have you seen to that?
Yeah, so this is really interesting, and this is something that I would say has come about in the last couple months for us. We've had searchers out there that we've matched with companies where a negotiated exit was, negotiated and signed, and that operator actually has come into the company on average, I'd say like 2 years before that company is even planning to exit. So that we call it operator to owner for us in our program. And it's a way for a searcher and operator to come into a business, work, side by side with that founder, gather the knowledge that they have, reduce the customer concentration
Mhm.
from time to time if that's a challenge, and really partner and have a successful business. Now, the goal, of course, is to, increase EBITDA during that time. And that's value to the operator because that price is already negotiated. I feel like it does something as well for the companies out there that may get passed over by a broker, may not be ready to exit, may not know how to exit. It gives them a path where they do have that exit versus what the alternative could be, which is possibly closure.
Right? Close or sell to someone for 1 to 2 times.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess in that kind of marketplace, that I would think that the problem would be supply, not demand. Like I think if any searcher could remove the search part, they would do it. So I guess how do you get the companies?
So we do outreach
Okay.
ourselves. I would say the interesting thing as well is we've had it actually started because we had companies come to us asking, I want to exit. And when we started talking to them, we were like, oh, you're probably 1 to 3 years from exiting.
Mhm.
And they came to us and essentially said, okay, well, how can I grow and how can I build value in those next 1 to 3 years? And through that, then we started seeing some matching that we could create between the searchers we had in our network and these companies that came to us. And then that's how this program came to be. We continue to see companies come to us, and I would say the number one challenge they have is founder dependent
Right.
sales, which is something that's completely fixable.
Train someone else to sell. So that, I guess, let's go deeper on this because this is interesting to me in terms of like you're basically predetermining the deal. Is that based on what the founder needs at exit and who's negotiating that?
So we're not a broker. We're
Okay.
not, I'll answer that last part
Yeah,
first. We're
yeah,
not a
yeah.
broker. We're not M&A advisors.
Hmm.
That being said, we have a robust expert network where we do have brokers and we do have M&A advisors. So they are the ones that are negotiating the terms of this. It has been a predetermined multiple on the EBITDA that exists when that company has come to us. We have five experts get a typical like recruiting placement fee when we do place a searcher in those companies. So again, we're not negotiating it. That said, we have people in our network that are.
Hmm.
And then it at the end of the day, like I mentioned, the multiple seems to be higher than what that company would otherwise, right? It's not a 1 to 2x. They get a higher multiple. They have a guarantee on the exit. The searcher finds the company that is a good match for them that they're looking for. They actually get a salary. So rather than, paying their own way and searching, it speeds up that process. So it's something we're exploring more, but there seems to be quite a bit of interest in the process and program.
No, that's interesting because I mean I think we've talked about this maybe in the pre-call, but there's this idea that all of the baby boomers have to sell their companies and buying companies increasingly popular. But on both sides, most businesses listed don't sell. On the buying side, most people looking for companies don't buy. So it's not as rosy as it looks. There's still something missing. So it's interesting to hear that you have like a different solution for it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think what the statistic is 92% of companies end up closing. And I think it's something like 30% of companies that work with a broker don't sell. There seems to be that math problem
Yeah.
challenge in there where it doesn't necessarily make sense because there's millions of searchers out there and there's obviously I think 6 million companies are estimated to close in the next decade. So there is that math problem. And I mean, for us, like, I love challenges. So for me, like, this is something that, like, if we can help make this happen, it would be extremely exciting for me.
Yeah. No, I mean that's interesting. I think I know some people who might be interested in that. But I guess beyond kind of like the first two, I guess, phases of this, there gets to the part where you have to actually run the business. So you mentioned you got playbooks and experts and stuff like that. I know in certain models, like a big private equity firm will have operating partners that maybe are a genius at marketing or hiring or whatever. Similar in this traditional search world, a lot of the big lead investors will have something similar. But when you're going to like a self-funded search, and for those who don't know, traditional search, typically you raise seed money to look for business, to pay a salary, to have an office, sometimes interns. And then when you find a company, investors get first right of refusal, or you could pay for all those expenses yourself as you search and then bring investors when you actually have a deal. So that's kind of, we didn't introduce it at the beginning, but if anybody's still listening, that's what that means. So your product is really tailored towards the self-funded folks who are not taking seed capital to start. They're using their own money. They're trying to find a company, and they know that eventually they're either going to use their own capital to buy it with an SBA loan or their own capital plus investors plus an SBA loan typically. And so for those folks, typically there's not a lot of boards behind that. And if there is a board, it's probably based on kind of the LPs they have. There's not necessarily, unless they really were strategic in picking every single LP they approached, like someone who knows marketing, recruiting, sales, customer service. There's not as much of the same kind of like built-in experts. So like it seems like that's something you're trying to do. So talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like and what people get access to.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the last company I was at was a search fund company where I ran sales, and it was backed by Pacific Lake Partners, Endurance, Trilogy, a few others. And what I really valued from that experience was the operating partners that we worked with at Pacific Lake and the value creation plans and playbooks that they provided us. And when that company was acquired, I was starting to look at the marketplace and realize for self-funded searchers in the lower middle market, there really wasn't any resource out there similar to that model. And
Mhm.
so that's something we really wanted to build is yes, if you do not have a board in place and you don't have that marketing resource that you can call on or that sales resource or finance and whatever expertise you need, really the start of Five Experts was around that. How do you build out value creation playbooks and the value creation resources to help a self-funded searcher and new owner through every stage of the process. And so to that point, we have about 250 value creation playbooks. Now, one of the things I always have valued is giving a playbook is one thing, but then actually having someone to call on when you need to is equally as important. And so we don't just sort of give you the playbooks and say, hey, good luck and here's what you should do. We have peer resources and a community, as well as all of those experts there that you can call on at any time.
And so I know if those familiar with private equity probably know the term value creation. I think the way someone like me can understand it, you make a business more valuable by running it, not by operating the spreadsheet. So you have to actually improve things. So when you talk about playbooks, could you give an example of one? Like I'm thinking maybe an HVAC company, what's like a playbook that would be brought forth by kind of these experts?
Yeah, so when you think about value creation too, it's not just how do I grow the revenue of the company. It's
Mhm.
also how do I look at my margins and how do I reduce my margins and as well as looking at people, process within the organization, like how do I manage my people to have them produce more value for the company? And sometimes that can be reduction, unfortunately, and sometimes that can be additional growth. But really, it's, everything that essentially you would need in terms of process, how to make that company more valuable within a given set time.
Mhm.
Like if you were to ask me a few years ago what that time might be, I would probably say 5 years is what typical investment firms look at in terms
Mhm.
of producing value of a company, right? Because they invest in a company and then they spend a set amount of time to grow that company and have it more valuable at the end of that period. Now, those timeframes for the investment companies out there seem to be getting longer, and
Mhm.
of course, there are situations now in that world that are more long term hold situations. But the goal really of value creation is to grow the company, to make it more valuable, to have a higher multiple that you could sell it for at the end of a set period of time.
So, in many ways, more efficient, maybe like more profits, better
That's
margins, less owner dependency, like all the risks. Basically, like the more risks that were addressed, and then the larger the revenue and margins and profits, the more valuable the multiple will be in the enterprise value in the end.
that's correct. That's a much better way of saying it. Much
Unfortunately,
more.
I've been asking people what value creation is for 2 years, so don't think I thought of this on the top of my head. Okay, no, I mean that's useful, and I think that that's something that I think there's some people who go the self-funded path that are thinking we don't want this to be our family business, we want to own this forever, but a lot of folks want to think of this as an investment themselves, and whether it's not as strict as maybe 5 to 7 years, it's maybe I want to see like the next 10 years what I could do with this, and then reevaluate, not necessarily decide to sell, but reevaluate what can we accomplish in 10 years that would make this company more valuable. Whether the exit is just doing an ESOP and employees own it, or if it's selling to a bigger company, competitor, private equity, like it's not really necessarily, if you make a value creation plan about, in my mind, it's not necessarily about like exiting necessarily. It's just about being exit ready, essentially.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the set time frame is also determined by whether you have investors or not. But
Yeah,
at the end of the day, it's always good if you're an owner of a new business to say where you want to be in a X amount of time, call it 5 years, and then see how much value you can drive in the 5 years. And to your point, the 5 year mark may not be an exit. It just might be a marker for you to take a step back and say, like, how much more valuable is this company from where I started with it?
right, right. Okay, I think that's a good. We went through the different 5 phases. I think maybe just to go back to the start, because I think that's where most people who are thinking about this are. One thing that I thought I kind of took away from my search was that essentially it felt like the more industry expertise you had, the better. But the model in some ways is you don't need industry expertise. Where do you stand on that in terms of like thinking, you come from working in healthcare, you should definitely be looking for a healthcare business. Like, is that something that you advise on, or do you leave it more to the folks who are in your program to just try it, see what happens with the owner responses, and adapt from there?
I think it depends on what industry you're, it definitely depends on what industry you're looking at. There are certain industries out there that require you to have licenses, for example. So you may need a partner, for
Mhm.
instance, in a certain industry if you need someone with a particular license to
Yeah.
come in. That being said, I think it's always good for you, and I would say this whether you're a searcher or not, to really find, and I'm going to speak in sales terms now, really find your ideal customer profile, which is
Yeah.
really what companies out there are you passionate about, because at the end of the day you're going to need to wake up every day and come in and own this company and essentially lead it.
Mhm.
Like, that's the most important thing. And so, if you're not passionate about a certain industry and you don't want to wake up every day and really know that industry in and out and know who your customers are going to be and who you're selling to and who you're serving at the end of the day with your customers, probably isn't an industry for you if you don't want to jump into that. So I think, like anything else, like being true to yourself, knowing what your passions are, knowing the kinds of companies that are going to get you excited to wake up every day,
Right.
or stay there until 11 o'clock at night when you're having to try and solve a people problem with one of your employees or a customer challenge and your biggest customer may be leaving. That's the biggest advice I would give, is know what you're passionate about, know the areas that you are not passionate about so that you can eliminate those kinds of companies.
No, makes a lot of sense. All right,
It's
Stephanie Quay, the five experts. It was really good having you on. I guess if people are now, like after hearing you talk, want to learn more about you and what you're doing, would be a good way to reach out.
Yeah, so there's a contact form on
Okay.
fiveexperts.com. So that's, a really great way. You can always email us at team@fiveexperts.com as well. And we have our contact information on the website. Anybody can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. So Stephanie Quay at fiveexperts.com.
All right. I'll put all that in the show notes. I expect your inbox to start getting a little more lively.
I hope so. I hope so. This was fun, Brian.
Yeah. It's great having you on. Maybe next year I'll check back in to see how the market's changing. See what you're
Yeah,
learning.
yeah, absolutely. And let's stay connected too.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be great. All right.
Yeah,
Stephanie, appreciate having you on. This is really good.
thank you.
Talk to you again soon. Thanks.